Just give a little intro about the club. Hey man, how you doing? It's been 2 years. Yeah, and it was like, that's right. And we hosted you, right? Were you used to be? Yeah. That's right, man. Good to see you, Brian. So, okay. Should we get another mic, or should we just share one mic? Okay. I could use some water though. Absolutely. Good, yeah, we all need some water. Hey brother, how you doing? Okay, let me go get some water. Yeah, go. Is he going to give us a countdown? Is he giving us a countdown, brother? Brian. I have to stand on this, right? All right. I love this photograph. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We are very excited to have you here tonight at our crime fighting to save the world's biodiversity event, where we're going to be highlighting the amazing Wildlife Justice Commission. So I'm Mark Fowler. I am the chairman of wildlife here at the Explorers Club, and I served as the vice president of conservation for the last 6 years. So we're here to celebrate the amazing work that's being done by the Wildlife Justice Commission and our friend Brian Gaisford from Hemingway Safaris and Hemingway Gallery. Brian has been my inspiration for a lot of years to work in the wildlife crime sphere. I started working with Brian in 2016 when we went to CITES in South Africa, and he said, Mark, everybody's celebrating here and shaking hands and saying, oh, we did it, we saved all these animals. But 1 mile down the road is all the same animals for sale in these illegal medicine markets. In fact, not illegal even. That's the challenge. So right down the road in downtown Joburg, every endangered species was being sold in these markets. So we went down there undercover and filmed what was happening. And, I don't want to get too into detail because it would have put Brian's family at risk if they knew that we were doing that, his family in South Africa. So that's how serious it is. But we were able to release it on News 24 that night and take some action and show what was really happening in South Africa. Because, we have to take action. And wildlife trafficking is one of the largest crimes in the world. When it comes to environmental crime, when you add up fish and illegal fishing, and you add up illegal timber, and you add up wildlife crime, now you're talking about 100 billion or something crazy like that. So this is big money. And, when you get big money, you get organized crime, and you get organized crime syndicates. So you have to start thinking. You have to organize your law enforcement, and law enforcement has to break down all those jurisdictional boundaries that are existing globally. Different countries, different districts, different governments, and different law enforcement agencies. So in reality, the hardest thing is the collaboration. We have to act organized the same way that the criminals are, and we have to break down all of that. So collaboration in the law enforcement world is so incredibly important, and that's why what the Wildlife Justice Commission is doing is so important. So I'm going to hand it over to my good friend Brian Gaisford, he's a true activist conservationist who puts his life on the line, on the front line. He puts his life on the line. I'm serious about this. I've seen it many times, but he's ultra passionate, and he's been doing some really interesting work in the trophy trade, which is essentially, the same animals are being trafficked, but as trophies in a quasi-legal, quasi-illegal world. So I'm going to let Brian take the helm here, and he'll be introducing our amazing speaker, Olivia Swack Goldman, who is the CEO of the Wildlife Justice Commission. So thank you.
Thank you. Mark's on my payroll. This wildlife crime is a huge market, and it just spans so many aspects. We go from rhino horn to lion bone to donkey skins, and it's just on and on and on, and it's all flowing to China. It's and what I've been really involved with lately is figuring out why trophy hunting of our iconic species like elephant and lion is not a wildlife crime, because it's been done legally. We've lost all our big bull elephants in South Africa and Botswana and Zimbabwe due to trophy hunting. So I'd like to point a finger in that direction. And there's a couple of people here that are really standing out and doing amazing work. If I can introduce Jesse Pollock. Jesse, can you stand up, please? This is, Jesse has done, Jesse is the head of Environmental Protection Agency in New York State, and he almost single-handedly shut down the ivory markets in New York to his work, and amazing. And, you know, wildlife crime and killing poachers is pretty a sad business. But there is an aspect, a fun aspect that we've been doing is using soccer to inside the poaching villages. We can actually go into the poaching villages now and talk to the poachers because of soccer. Why can't the greatest game in the world save the greatest animals? And I'm just happy to have Matt Bracken here tonight from Wild and Free Foundation, who spearheaded this, and we've been working together. I mean, the last event we had was we organized, the rangers played the poachers, and they beat us. So Matt Bracken, please. So it's been a fun event, but we are trying to use, and people say, well, you know, it's about money. So, Matt's been organizing ways. We've been trying to get fishing equipment over to the poachers so they can do fishing tournaments and doing agricultural programs, right? So, amazing. Thank you, Matt. And Matt, what I have to mention Vincent Barkus, who is the head of ProTrack Rangers in South Africa, who worked very closely with Matt, and he's also amazing, and just got sick and tired of killing poachers because it's not working. So maybe thinking outside the box with the soccer for poachers can help. And then fatigue and empathy. It's a condition you can get from beating your head against the wall with no light at the end of the tunnel. And I was getting this. I had focused for 10 years. I was focused on this guy in Navarra, the head poacher in Mozambique, and nothing was working. Corruption was to the top in Mozambique, to the top in South Africa. We've been inside his village. We've been all over trying to get attention to this guy. He killed a friend of mine, Dr. Meyer, in Gravelot in South Africa, executed him, and just drove his car. He was named Navarra because he hijacks Nissan Navara cars, and he just drives them from South Africa right through the border. Nothing happens to him, and just on and on and on and on. He actually, one kid never brought because he rented out the poaching rifles to these young the poachers who we work in soccer with, he brought him back into South Africa and beat his father to death in front of him. So there's Navarra, and then I met Olivia. She took him down. So in all the work, and I mean, a lot of people ask me, well, how can we help? Who should we turn to? Who can we help? Well, Wild and Free, I mean, the Wildlife Justice Commission is top of my list. So, Olivia, I'm honored to have you here tonight. And so I just want to make sure she's qualified. So, what happened to my glasses? Yeah. Whose are these? Huh? Olivia is the executive director of the Wildlife Justice Commission. She has almost 3 decades of experience in international justice and diplomacy. She has published extensively on issues of international criminal law and international humanitarian law. She served as a lecturer at both Harvard and Leiden universities. Olivia has previously been head of the International Relations Task Force of the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. She has also worked with the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Iran United States Claims Tribunal, and the UN International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. She is a registered attorney in New York and Washington, D.C. Olivia has been working with the Wildlife Justice Commission to disrupt and dismantle transnational organized wildlife crime networks since 2016. The Wildlife Justice Commission has now expanded, good news, has expanded to the United States to build on successful partnerships with U.S. federal law enforcement agencies and like-minded organizations. Olivia dismantled over 50 criminal networks across Africa and Asia. Facilitated 23 arrests, including several notorious criminals like the rhino kingpin, Navarro, in Mozambique, who was arrested in July 2021. When I saw that, I freaked out. But of course, somebody else, and I met with Andrew Lumby, the head of security in Kruger National Park, a couple of months ago, and he assured me that Navarro is sitting in the worst jail in Mozambique and he is not getting out. So let's hope that sends a message to the next in line. Thank you, Olivia.
This is Kuala Lumpur International Airport, one of the busiest transport hubs in the region. And a few years ago, a plane landed, an individual got off the plane, made it through customs, and headed into a taxi toward his hotel. Now, this individual was a kingpin of a major international network trafficking an endangered species. And he was also the target of the Wildlife Justice Commission's long-term investigation. He heads into a taxi and towards his hotel. Meanwhile, half a world away, in The Hague, in an innocuous office tower in the edges of the city, a group of us are surrounding a TV screen. And we've got the comms director, the intelligence analyst, but the data entry people, the finance people, really everybody is kind of jostling to get in front of this TV screen. And we're really nervous. We're nervous for a couple of reasons, me in particular. One is that we're hoping and nervous that this operation is a success. Also, I'm nervous, will this new approach toward fighting wildlife crime really work? This idea of working with local law enforcement agencies across the supply chain and using those advanced investigative techniques, would it work in practice? We thought it would, but we wanted to make sure, and here it was coming down to it. So around this television screen, there's a live stream from Kuala Lumpur, where secret cameras have been placed so that we can all watch as this sting operation is about to happen. This trafficker, this kingpin responsible for generating millions of dollars every year by trafficking an endangered species, thinks that he's meeting with someone to buy his protected species, a buyer, another kingpin, when really that individual is our colleague, our undercover operative, who's working very closely with the Malaysian Wildlife Crime Enforcement Agency. Now the criminal walks into the hotel room and begins the final stages of the negotiations on this deal. So what is this operation? This is a long-term investigation of the Wildlife Justice Commission, and it's an operation we named Operation Dragon. And this is our dragon. Exactly, the little turtles and tortoises. In 2016, international focus was generated towards the iconic species, towards the elephants that were being slaughtered for their ivory, and the rhinos being killed for their horns. But no one was really focusing on the trafficking of freshwater turtles and tortoises. The little turtles got overlooked, and that's something that I can't handle. So I said, we gotta look out for the ivory and the rhino, but the turtles need attention too. So what's interesting is during this Operation Dragon, Wildlife Justice Commission investigators were offered over 20,000 protected turtles from 16 different species, some of them on the brink of extinction. And no one was focusing on these. In 2015, the situation was dire. Wildlife crime, as we've heard, was just slaughtering animals, pushing species to the brink of extinction. Law enforcement, unfortunately, wasn't able to address this issue in a really systemic way. They were focusing on low-level poachers and not on those in charge, not those leading these organizations. They weren't able to coordinate. They weren't cooperating with the governments across the border. Whereas criminal networks are able to move freely across borders, governments weren't. They were staying focused on low-level poachers. So these networks that were able to involve in really sophisticated logistics, planes, trains, automobiles, all of it, yet the law enforcement wasn't able to address it in a really systemic, effective way. So whereas much of wildlife crime is organized by criminal networks, the law enforcement response at the time was weak and low and not resourced enough. It wasn't given the priority that it needed to have. And conservation organizations, they despaired, and for good reason. There were a lot of species, elephants and rhinos, but many others also pushed to the brink of extinction forever. So while there was really valuable work being done in the field, it clearly was not enough. We needed to do something different. So to counter this dire situation, several organizations joined together in 2015 to create the Wildlife Justice Commission. It was intended to increase investigation, prosecution, and conviction for those key individuals that lead these criminal networks that traffic in endangered species, the ones who are orchestrating the destruction of our biodiversity for profit. And it was meant to fill the gap between law enforcement that was unable to cooperate across borders. We wanted to make it easy for governments to go after the kingpins and hard not to, and to change the dynamic of wildlife crime from this low-risk, high-reward crime type, to make it really impactful so that the criminals don't want to engage in this type of crime anymore that's having such a devastating impact. Now, it was founded in The Hague, the city of peace and justice, and it was modeled on a lot of the other courts and tribunals that are based in The Hague. These courts and tribunals are addressing some of the gravest crimes known to humanity. And there was really this idea of like, how is it possible that none of these organizations has jurisdiction over wildlife crime that is destroying our biodiversity for profit? How is it possible that there's no entity that's addressing this on an international level? It was a huge gap, and filling it could have a big impact. So they created a new institution, a nonprofit funded by individuals and organizations to ensure accountability for the most impactful offenders targeting the most vulnerable species. It was created in response to the failure to address wildlife crime with the same rigor as is applied to other forms of transnational organized crime. Once I heard about it, it seemed so obvious to me. I really couldn't believe that it didn't already exist. We know how to address organized crime. The question is, are we ready now to apply the tools and techniques such as surveillance, controlled deliveries, intelligence analysis? Are we ready to apply those to those criminal networks that are destroying our biodiversity and pushing species to extinction? These are my kids. Or they were a few years ago. They're a little bigger now. One of us with us tonight. But I really couldn't bear personally the thought of my kids growing up in a world without being able to see rhinos, tigers, elephants, sharks, to walk in ancient forests, or to see a turtle. So for me, it's a real honor and a pleasure to wake up every day and knowing that we're all joining together to fight wildlife crime. Now, these criminal networks, they're agnostic in terms of place and species. They will traffic in whatever is making a lot of money and where law enforcement response is low. So at the Wildlife Justice Commission, we have a similar approach. We focus on those species that are being trafficked wherever they're being trafficked. So we work in Africa and Asia, obviously, but also in South America, in Oceania, in Europe. So we really follow the criminal networks so that we're hitting them while they're down. And we work on a bunch of different species. And these include now that's a baby tiger that's trafficked for its parts. So they have trafficking farms, like tiger farms, where they just create them to destroy them, and also for the live pet trade. A far too familiar image, a rhino poached for its horn. Sharks killed for their fins. We've lost 70% of our sharks since 1970, and that's just devastating. Ancient forests cleared for their timber. Now that's a baby orangutan, which is trafficked for the live pet trade. And not only is it devastating for this baby orangutan, but it's important to keep in mind that research has shown that for every baby that's trafficked, 2 adults are killed. So the impact is just horrific. Now, these crimes have devastating impacts in addition to destroying our biodiversity. It also affects human health. 75% of emerging diseases are zoonotic in nature. It has an impact on security. It impacts the rule of law as citizens wonder why their government isn't enforcing these rules and regulations. and it has an impact on climate change. You take out the sharks, these apex predators in the ocean, the ecosystem of the ocean is much less resilient and less able to absorb carbon. Same, obviously, with the illegal timber trade and the devastation that's causing to our forests that are such key elements in absorbing carbon. Wildlife crime also has important links to other forms of organized crime. So these networks, they diversify the criminal commodities in which they operate. So they're trafficking not only in wildlife, but also in humans, in weapons, and in drugs. And these corrupt officials are allowing humans out and wildlife products into their countries. So this is really important. Wildlife crime, it's been called the soft underbelly of organized crime because they're slightly less aware of the modalities, but they're generating profits for these criminal networks that they're using in addition to fund other forms of illegal activity, which are just horrific. It's also deeply, deeply embedded with corruption. Corruption is the air that wildlife crime breathes, and it stimulates corruption. So it's this vicious circle. You get corrupt elements that allow these products in and out, and then that seeds more and more corruption. And that's devastating for societies, regardless of wildlife. It's devastating to have this level of corruption in a society. And obviously, if you're generating huge amounts of profit in the illegal world, that has to be laundered into the formal economy. So huge amounts of money laundering elements also deeply involved. So we really push for the need for financial investigations to go after the financial side also. That'll also show you who some of the kingpins are, going beyond just the work on the ground. Let's look at who's making the money and go after them. And back to the turtles. So the trafficking of turtles and tortoises is incredibly devastating for all the reasons I've just mentioned, but also because turtles and tortoises play a really important role in keeping their ecosystems healthy. Tortoises and turtles are seed and spore dispersers, which are essential for a lot of plants and trees and fungi. Snapping and soft-shelled turtles are important scavengers, which means they keep their aquatic ecosystems healthy. So if you take these species out of their ecosystems, this can have longer-term cascading environmental effects, which none of us want to see. Now back to that hotel room in Kuala Lumpur. As we watched the drama unfold from The Hague, the hidden camera picked up the suspect, and he was negotiating the last little bits of the deal with our colleague. And once the final deals were agreed upon, our colleague left the room, and the Wildlife Authority of Malaysia came in and arrested the individual. I'll show you a little bit of what that looked like. I love the part when the turtles are trying to escape. They're like, I'm out of here, I see a moment. Yeah. But all jokes aside, as a result of Operation Dragon, over 6,000 turtles and tortoises were saved. Yeah, it's great. It's really, you know. And the teamwork was phenomenal. 30 suspects were arrested and prosecuted and convicted. 8 criminal networks were disrupted. And importantly, the corruption enabling all of this was exposed and identified and studied. And for me, what was really important, as well as these individual results, was the proof that our model of working across the supply chain with law enforcement, using the tools and techniques that we use to address other forms of organized crime, would work in practice. This was a really great moment for us to see that it was really successful. It also demonstrated that cooperation across jurisdictions, as Mark said, absolutely essential, but we could do it. We could do it if we really tried. So we were able to work with authorities in Malaysia and in India and in Interpol, amongst many, many others. And this ability to work together meant that we could go after and get arrested and convicted some of the largest criminals that operate in multiple jurisdictions. The intelligence and evidence that was collected by our team, it provided an in-depth understanding of the individual roles, so that's important, the individual, but also the network dynamics, how these networks function, where are the risks, how do they operate when someone's taken out. And all of this is given to law enforcement so that they can then be ready to attack the next network and to be getting smarter and smarter. Because before this, the law enforcement was often one step ahead, one step behind of the criminals, often because of corruption. So this helps them to get smarter and to learn and to see what the dynamics are. And it allows them to target the most impactful offenders in a time-conscious manner. Now, as the Wildlife Justice Commission continues ongoing investigations and expanding our work around the world and trying to apply this to ever more investigations, we now have 34 investigations in 27 countries and more groundbreaking cases to come. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you to Brian and John and the Explorers Club for allowing us the opportunity to speak tonight.
Let's do some Q&A.
This is being live streamed, so a lot of people are seeing this tonight.
So we'd like to say hello to all of our live streaming viewers. Thank you for joining us to celebrate the Wildlife Justice Commission. I think we're going to do some Q&A because a lot of people have questions here in the audience, and I'd love to learn more. I worked with Homeland Security Investigations called HSI with Rod Katabi, who is one of their leaders, and we worked with all across the world with USAID and INL and UNODC, all these acronyms, but these are very important organizations that fight crime, which you all work with. And together we can break down all those barriers and really make a difference. So let's open up the room to questions, and then we'll have Olivia answer. Right over here.
All right. I'm going to pass you the mic.
Thank you. That was so enlightening and encouraging. Thank you for the incredible work that you and your colleagues are doing, first of all. My question is, how much corruption do you find at the local level that makes it difficult for you to do your job? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you for that, because as we discussed, corruption is a key enabler of this crime type. So unless you can somehow mitigate that, you're never going to be able to go after the top level criminals. And that was the story of Navarra as well. He was incredibly protected in where he was. So what we've found is that there are some tremendous local heroes that are willing to do whatever it takes to get the criminals and to go after those key offenders. So you really need to suss out who those individuals are and work closely with them and keep your operations quiet. I was in The Hague recently, and someone was saying, God, I think that I know a fair amount about this area, but I've never heard of you. And I was like, well, that's, it's got its downsides, but it's got its plus sides as well. So really, we work with these enforcement agencies and keep it closed on the investigative side. On the policy side, I think we need to partner with as many organizations as possible to be achieving long-term systemic policy change. But we're really being careful about who you're partnering with and finding those local heroes and they are there. There's no question about it. And we've been really successful in finding those partners and building relationships with them, whether it's in Nigeria or Mozambique or in South Africa or in Thailand or in Vietnam or in Peru. So they're there. We just have to look carefully and take it step by step. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Olivia. That was great. I wouldn't mind you telling us a little bit about how you took out Navarro. Very curious.
Well, and Navarro is not the only one of these level 5, we call them traffickers, that we've taken out. We have several. But we always like the law enforcement authority that's actually done the hard work on it to get the credit. So we don't always go out and say what we've done unless they're willing for us to do it. So the CERNIC, which is the organized crime police in Mozambique, they were happy to show the work that we've done together with them, and Nigerian Customs Service similar. But you've got to be able to get a relationship with these high-level people. They're not stupid. So they're going to do what it takes to protect themselves. So you've got to get around that barrier. And working with law enforcement using advanced investigative techniques is the way that we've found that really works. So you do intelligence analysis, you figure out who the key individuals are, you figure out how they operate, and then you see the weaknesses in the way that they operate. And then you can exploit that together with your law enforcement partners in order to create a situation where they're suddenly vulnerable. So that's the way we did it there, but with others as well. Thank you.
You have someone over in the corner over there. Go ahead.
Raise your hand, please.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this amazing presentation and for the incredible work that you do. I'm very curious to hear more about your U.S. expansion plans and what that entails and where that will be and who some of your partners are.
Sure. Well, this is an exciting moment for us. I've been working on governance for 2 years, and we're finally through that phase, so I can focus on things that I love to do like this. But it was a really important step for us to move into the U.S. And we've got Maggie Jacoby and Drew, who are here from our U.S. office, so I'm sure they're happy to meet with anyone and talk about what we're doing. But the idea was we wanted to be in the U.S. for a couple of reasons. The first is the tremendous work that law enforcement is doing here. HSI is doing phenomenal work and really expanding recently their jurisdiction in this area. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we've worked very closely with them across multiple jurisdictions and in some phenomenal cases. So that relationship's strong. The U.S. has really good jurisdiction on this issue. There's something that many of you know it, the Lacey Act. And that means that if there is a violation of local law, and there is some link with the U.S. has jurisdiction. I'm sure our colleague from the Brooklyn DA can talk more about it. But that is an example for the rest of the world. It really is. If we want to stop these kind of crimes, we need to be prosecuting them wherever we can be. So our work with U.S. authorities was a real reason to be here. Also on the policy front, the U.S. is very strong. They're very engaged in this issue, so we thought that was important as well. And also to be closer to some of the partners, whether that we work with the WWFs and the trafficks and a lot of these organizations, especially on the policy field and FACT Coalition, looking at different aspects of how to solve this crime. So I'm a big believer in alliances and networks and unlikely partners. So we work with, for example, the Association of Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists, because they've got a key constituency there. These individuals are looking at these transactions, and if they see something like a red flag for wildlife, that's important, but many others. So the U.S. is just an ideal spot for us to be engaging in that policy and that ecosystem that can make us even more effective together than we are on our own. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your excellent presentation. I'd like to ask a slightly more fundamental question, how are we defining wildlife crime? I think you've spoken about organization as a key parameter there. But what are some of the other key markers that you look at in your decision-making process, which I'm sure you take very seriously? You want to know what your parameters are for deciding, yes, this is definitely something we should be targeting and looking at versus that one's not.
Exactly. And we're a small organization. We can't be everywhere. But I feel really strongly, one, we want to be representative, so looking all over the world, not just the Africa-Asia nexus. The unlikely species also, not just the iconic ones, but some of those ones that are being trafficked to the point of extinction and nobody's paying attention. So we really look very carefully at a bunch of different elements. We have a rating system that we've developed. Personally, I think it comes down to, and this is sort of my lodestar, is are we going after the most impactful offenders that are trafficking in the most vulnerable species? And vulnerable means either to the brink of extinction or being massively trafficked so that they're endangered and law enforcement is just not addressing it. So those are the two things that I'm constantly thinking about. And it comes from my experience working in international criminal law at the courts and tribunals, where we also had to be really specific. What are the cases that we need to bring? And which cases can be done by others? You don't need to do it all yourself. You need to be thinking, where's our added value? So we're really looking at those biggest traffickers and their networks, not just the individuals, but the networks, and then those species that are the most vulnerable and haven't had the attention that they need. Thank you.
I was wondering about how much support you feel that you get on the other side. So, for instance, educating consumers about this market and why they shouldn't support it.
Yeah, education is absolutely critical. And that's the long game, right? We need to be, the kids need to know that this is, my kids know it, but kids all over the world need to know it, that they should not be trafficking in endangered species, that these ornaments come from live animals that are then being destroyed. So that is absolutely essential. And there are a lot of great organizations doing that, and they are doing really long-term work there. At the Wildlife Justice Commission, we focus on the trafficking networks and the criminals, but what we try and do, again, this is where I think it's so important to work together, is to use the information from our criminal investigations and share that with the policymakers and the demand reduction experts. So I'll just give you one example. A lot of the work of demand reduction for rhino horn was focused on traditional Chinese medicine and the offcuts and the powders. That's important, but what we saw in our long-term investigations and analysis was that a lot of the demand for rhino horn was linked to status symbols, so to bowls and bracelets and things like that. So if you're only focusing on the medicinal side, you're missing a big part of the demand. So we try and share that information with these great organizations that are doing that education in the longer term. Thank you.
I was just wondering whether local markers such as socioeconomic status may affect the way that you look at feasibility when you approach, species in a country that you might be going after. I'm just thinking there was mention of Zimbabwe earlier in the discussion, and the last time I was there, I was in Harare, and I was so shocked to find out that there was a 94% unemployment rate overall. And so the economic pressure and the temptation to engage in activity is so high. So I was just wondering whether that kind of variable might affect issues of feasibility as you make decisions about which areas to go into.
That's a really important point. And it's exactly why we were created, because it's like drugs. If you're going after the kid on the street, you're not going to solve the problem, because there are a lot of factors going into that person's decision making, socioeconomic included. That's why we need to go after those high up in the chain, the individuals that are sitting far away from that field or that on that boat, the ones that are sitting in their villas, and going after them. Because if you take them out, you're really going to have an impact down the chain. And then those individuals that have socioeconomic issues, they're not going to be looking at the poaching, because that's no longer going to be a viable alternative for them. Tied into that, we need to be doing a lot more on community engagement, offering these individuals and a way to make a living. And I think John's organization is doing great work on that as well. But really offering them an alternative, but making this not be one of the alternatives. So it's both sides of the coin. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a question here. I was thinking, trying to understand scope over here. Sorry. So you said this is a massive problem, like, losing 70% of sharks since 1970. And that's just one species. And you've said you've made significant effects with your work that you're doing. What's the scale of that? Like, do you feel on the broad scale of this issue that you're hitting the tip of the iceberg, or do you think that you're really making significant progress in making a change in this industry?
The way I look at it and the way we measure our success, we're making real impact and a real difference. And I'll just give you an example. So Nigeria was an important hub for the trafficking of pangolin scales and ivory into Asia. It was, one of the key destinations. It would go from Africa all the way to Nigeria and then Nigeria over. We've worked really closely with the Nigeria Customs Service, who has some great individuals working there, and has really undertaken long-term intelligence-led investigations. They've gotten, for the first time, they arrested and prosecuted and convicted Asian traffickers there, so across the supply chain. We helped them to prepare the material for trial so that we could show overwhelming evidence of the criminality of these individuals. And there hasn't been a major seizure of pangolin scales from Africa to Asia in over 2 years. So that, I like to think of, is a really important marker for the impact that we're having. And that's just one species. We've got data on other species as well, but yeah.
Thanks, Olivia. I just have a question about those turtles back to that hotel room. That gentleman, he just flew in, like, we can't get on the plane with a water bottle. This guy got on with a massive suitcase full of turtles, and are you saying that he just waits till there's a corrupt officer and then puts the bag through? Like, that's a lot of organization in the airport to make sure he gets in on time. That corruption is just kind of baffles me, how he gets in with so many just turtles.
Exactly. It's baffling, but it happens because they're organized. They have what they're called settings, which is corrupt officials that are opening the doors for them, literally. So he got on with the turtles, but we did a report on rhino horn trafficking over the last 10 years. What the state of rhino horn trafficking 10 years ago and what it is now, what's worked well, what hasn't worked well. And we found that 1/3 of all rhino horns trafficked through our Tambo airport wasn't even concealed. They didn't even bother to wrap it up because they had corrupt officials helping them to get it onto the plane. So that's why I'm saying corruption is the Scrooge. This is the thing we've got to address. And by using advanced investigative techniques and intelligence analysis, we can help to figure out also who the corrupt officials are and go after them. So what's nice about this is it's a big problem, but I completely believe that it's not an insolvable problem. I see the impact we're having, and also all of us here this evening, that you all have spent the time also online to care about this issue. I am really convinced that this is a problem we can solve in my working lifetime. So thank you.
I have to tell you, I'm very inspired by the Wildlife Justice Commission, and thank you, Olivia, because you touched on the other pillars, sort of the demand reduction, as well as investing in communities. And I appreciate our guests who asked about that, because if we don't invest in communities, then those people don't have any other alternatives except for extracting resources. So I work with a group called Wildlife Works, and we invest heavily in the communities. So we can try to stop it before the animals are trafficked. But once these level 5 kingpins come into action, I'm just grateful that the Wildlife Justice Commission is there working so hard with across governments and with officials. Here's Brian Gaisford. Here we go. Thank you. You want to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to relay a funny incident, because when Olivia got Novara, I got a phone call from Mozambique, from one of the up-and-coming kingpins, and he said, Brian, I've got 20 kids, and I know rhinos are going to be finished next year. Can you get into the real estate business with me? So I said, well, what do you want to sell? He said, I want to sell my lodge. But little did he know that I'd been into Masangir and seen his lodge. It was it was a hovel. So it was kind of interesting. So we have to really sharpen our knives and keep on the toes and increase the penalties for this. But Olivia, thank you so much. And it's a tradition of the club to make you a presentation.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Brian. And thanks to all of our guests tonight. We really appreciate your dedication to come out and hear about these very challenging topics. And I'll tell you something. It's organizations like the Wildlife Justice Commission and people who are, will go on the front lines like Brian Gaisford, who give me hope. I mean, the truth is, the way we have to look at it is we can only make things better. And so all of our efforts, that's how I stay optimistic and positive, is because we can only make things better. So let's work together, go ahead and support the Wildlife Justice Commission. And we really appreciate all of your incredible interest in this. And we can all make a difference together. So thank you for coming to the Explorers Club. We're here every Monday night with different lecturers, and we welcome all of you to come back. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.